Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's history lesson. My name is Mr. Dixon. This lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Sabono Discovery Center. Today we are going to deal with topic 3 actually. Topic 2 is Angola. We will deal with that on some other time. But today we are dealing with topic 3, and topic 3 has got to do with the civil rights movement at large. Now, before we start with the civil rights movement, we are actually going to deal with how to interpret historical information and how you should respond to a source-based question. Now, it's paramount that we understand that all the essay questions from grade 10 up until grade 12 has been divided into three cognitive levels. And the three cognitive levels is what we will be discussing, and then we will continue over to the rest of the other levels. So we'll deal with level 1, we'll deal with level 2, and then we'll deal with level 3 at large. Now, let us quickly go into the first one basically. The first one is what we call level 1. Level 1 is what we call extraction evidence, and then selection and organization of relevant information, defining historical concepts. And the weighting is 30% and 14 marks. Then level 2 is interpretation of evidence from sources, explain information gathered from sources, analyze evidence from the different sources that you will be confronted with, and the weighting is 40% and 20 marks. Then level 3 is interpret, evaluate evidence from the source, engage with sources to determine its usefulness, how reliable is the source, how the biasness of the source, and the limitations. Then we are also going to look at compare and contrast. Contrast means differences, how we should interpret source. Then level 3 also includes what is not here. It is the paragraph question, and the weighting there is 30%, and it is normally 16 marks. Now, before we move over to the rest, it's important that we understand that all level 1 questions, the answers are found in the source. What is not in the source, it is basically the definitions. Definitions are never in the source, but all level 1 questions are in the source. If you understand the different levels, if you understand what is a level 1 question, if you understand what's a level 2, level 3, it makes it so much easier for you to actually answer the source-based questions. But there's another problem that we are confronted with. To answer the source-based questions, it's imperative that we need to study old question papers. We need to study how they are phrasing. We need to study how it's being structured, how it's being formulated. So that's paramount, how questions are being structured and formulated. Because what happens is, if English is not your mother tongue, it becomes difficult for you to answer those questions. But let's move over to level 1 questions. Level 1 questions require you as the individual or the candidate to extract information from sources and define historical concepts. These questions carry a maximum mark of about 2, meaning 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 1 is 2, 1 times 2. The 1 times 2, it's basically the definitions. 2 times 1, or sometimes it can be 3 or 4 times 1. Those are what we are going to deal with now afterwards. Let's go to the question verbs. The question verbs are as follows. It is not in chronological order, but these are the question verbs. List, quote, identify, name. This is what we call typical level 1 question verb basically. Now let's look at a typical level 1 question that will be posed to you. What information in the source tells you? Take note, what information in the source. It means it's in the source. So when they say what information, or they would rephrase it and say according to the source. When they say according to the source, it means the answer is where? In the source. You cannot copy paste it. Copy paste means as is. So when we move to the next typical level 1 question, quote 2, when they say quote, it means you must write it as is with inverted commas in front and at the back. You must close it with inverted commas. Then what do you understand by the term? So what do you understand by the term? It's basically the question that will be 1 times 2 marks. Now, what we dealt with now, it's a level 1 question. So we've dealt with the mark allocation, the question verbs, and a typical level 1 question that will be posed. We will be going through more of the level 1 questions, more of the level 2, more of the level 3 questions a bit later. Let's move to level 2 questions. Level 2 questions require you to interpret, analyze, and engage with evidence from the sources. These questions carry a maximum mark of basically 4 marks, meaning 2 times 2 equals 4. The question verbs are as follows. It's explain, comment, describe, organize. These are the words that they normally use when they construct sentences that will formulate what we call level 2 questions. Let's look at typical level 2 questions. What message does the cartoonist convey? Now, this we will deal with in this topic. For instance, explain in your own words. It means you must explain in your own words what is meant by a certain phrase in the source. What do you think, or what is implied? So this is these 3 are typical level 3 questions basically. What other level 2 questions is also, it is basically according to the source and your own knowledge. So it's imperative that we understand according to your source and your own knowledge, it becomes a level 2 question. When it says according to the source only, it remains a level 1 question. Now let's quickly move to level 3 questions. Level 3, we will be spending some time because we will have to go into more detail pertaining to certain question and phrasing of certain questions. Level 3 questions require you to explain the different perspectives of sources. You must draw conclusions about how reliable, useful, and how biased is the source, and also with regards to the limitations as such. These questions carry a maximum mark of basically 4 marks, but there is one level 3 question which is basically 8 marks, and that's a paragraph question. Now let's look at the question verbs quickly. Compare, contrast, comment, justify. Explain to what extent the evidence in source 1A, compare the evidence in 1A, 1B, comment on the usefulness, reliable, limitations. Now take note, they might indicate you explain how reliable is the source also at the same time. Then let's quickly go to the mark allocation. The mark allocation the meaning is as follows. When you look at on the screen, the first 2 numbers, there's 2 rows of numbers, but the first number on both rows, it's circled in red. So that indicates the amount of responses. When we talk about the amount of responses, we're talking about the amount of answers that must be provided. In this case, the first one, the 1 is circled in red, so it's 1 times 2. So that informs me that I must provide 1 answer and I will get 2 marks. The bottom one, 2 is circled, and then the second one is also 2. So it means I must provide 2 answers. 1 answer will be 2 marks, and if I provide 2, I will receive 4 marks. Then vice versa now. If this now we can clearly see that on the first line, the 3 is circled in red, and now we know that we need to provide 3 answers. 1 answer will be, take note, 1 answer will be 1 mark. So you must provide 3 answers, but 1 will be 1 mark. Then we go to the bottom. The second number is circled, so that means the amount of marks that will be allocated. Learners, it is paramount that we understand that when we look at the mark allocation of any particular question, that will guide us, that will support us, that will assist us in order for us to answer the question also correctly. Because what happens is sometimes learners are not answering the questions fully. So why do I say fully? It means now learners are not looking at the mark allocation. Maybe it says 2 times 2. So what happens is learners only provide 1 answer and expect to get 4. No, you must provide 2 answers in order to have your 4 marks or to receive the 4 marks. If you see a mark allocation of 1 times 1, it will equals 1, 2 times 1, it will equals 2, 3 times 1, it will equals 3. And that is basically how the questions will, how the mark allocation will be allocated per question. Take note, this is extraction questions that will be phrased like that. So your answers will be straight from the source. If you see a mark allocation of 1 times 2, you must go and look in the source first. The answer might be there. Look at the way the question is phrased. Very important. Look at the way how they phrase the question. Now let's go to another part of the mark allocation. If you see a mark allocation of 2 times 2, this is an interpretation or you must analyze the question, you need to have studied the work. You must have studied the work in order to look at the source, understand what is being asked of you, and apply your knowledge and skills to answer this particular question. Remember, always look at the mark allocation at the same time. Read the question, look at the mark allocation. That will guide you how you should answer your question. So a lot of the learners are losing marks because, yes, they read the question, but they don't look at the mark allocation. Now let's go into types of level 3 questions. For instance, how do sources support each other? Compare, contrast, biasness of sourcesness, how reliable is the source, usefulness of the source, and the limitations as such also. Let's go to what is support. When we look at what is support, we can clearly look at how does source A support source B. This question is asking you how the two sources are similar. It means, what do they have in common? So what should you do? You must go to source 1A and you find something in that source that is supported, shows the same thing in source 1B. In your answer, you should say source 1A says there are cars, and this is supported by 1B, which informs us or says there are bigger cars standing there. So what is the similarities? The similarities are basically cars. Then you need to go back and you must find another example of the same thing that the two sources have in common. So now we can clearly see, learners, let us just go back a little bit here. When we talk about supporting of sources actually means how similar are the two sources. Like I've said to you, what should you do? You must go to source 1A and find something in that source that is supporting or that shows the same thing in source 1B. Now, this is what you should do actually. Source 1A says or informs us there are cars. And this is supported by 1B, which informs us also there are bigger cars. Then you must go back and you must find another example, something that is in source A, something that's in source B. Now take note, you have mentioned already cars. So we can indicate both sources indicate there are cars available. Now you must go back. So now in source 1A, it informs us that the people ate an apple. In source 1B, it informs us that the people ate bananas. So now you can't say that in source A, now you can't say both sources informs us of apple and bananas. No. Now you need to inform us now, because now take note, apple and a banana, they are fruit. It's basically a fruit. But now you need to say in 1A, it says there are apples, and in 1B, it says there are bananas, meaning the similarities are fruits. Or you could say both sources indicate that people ate fruit. But now, because it's different fruits, it's best to actually indicate in source 1A there are apples, in 1B there are bananas. It means now you're indicating now the differences, but at the same time you're indicating the similarities. What are the similarities? Fruits are the similarities. So you must go back twice to source A, twice to 1B, and that will guide you how you should answer this particular question. Now let's go to contrast. You have to find out how the source contradict each other. Take note, it's 1A, 1B, how they are different from each other. How are the sources opposite to each other? And how do they say the opposite thing actually? So how should you answer this? You go to the first source and find something that is opposite or contradicts what's in the second source. And this is how your answer should be phrased. In source 1A says there are cars. And this is contradicted by source 1B, which says there are trains. Can we see the contradiction? The contradiction is the one says there are cars and the other one says there are trains. Then you must go back again. When you go back again you say source 1A says there are people standing in the streets. and it is contradicted by 1b, which indicates there are animals standing in the street. So what is the contradiction? People and animals, are they the same? No, they are not the same. People are human beings, animal are animals as such, basically. So learners, now we can clearly ascertain when they talk about compare, they talk about contradiction, they talk about opposites, they talk about difference. So when we look at contradiction, we're looking at opposites, we're looking at what is different from the two sources. When we go back to the previous slide, it spoke about support. When we talk about support, we talk about how similar are the two separate sources. Now, learners, we spoke about the mark allocation. Now, the mark allocation for this particular question is 2 times 2. So it means now you must provide two answers. If you provide the two answers, it means you will receive 4 marks. And always, learners, always these answers are found where? In the sources. All you have to do is interpret and analyze these sources. If you don't read the source thoroughly, you don't interpret it properly, you don't analyze it properly, it becomes difficult for you to answer these particular questions. So now the answer is, where's the answers? They are in the source. All you have to do is read it, interpret it, and compare the two sources. The minute you compare the two sources, now you will understand what is it to contradict. Contradict means opposite, it means different. At the same time, when they are supporting each other, it means similar. It means you need to find similar words or similar meanings within the two sources, and that will give you the guidelines how you should answer this particular question. Now let's move over to the biasness of the sources. What is biasness? A biased source is one that has only one point of view. It is one person, one country's opinion, thought, feeling on a particular matter. A biased source offers a limited view of something. Look for the motive of certain words at the same time. So when we look at biasness, like the first dot on the screen indicates, it is one point of view. So it means it is only one person, one country. It only comes from one side. Like when we dealt with Cold War, if the source is written by the USA, we know that the USA is from the West. We know that the USA support capitalism. So now the source actually informs us how bad is communism. So that makes the source biased, because why? The source is written from one side. It means now it's written from the USA side. And because the source is written from the USA side, it makes the source biased. By looking at that, it will also be able to assist you with regards to limitations. Now, let's quickly go to reliable. Take note now. 2 questions you need to ask yourself. If you ask yourself these questions, and these questions will be as follows. Is the source accurate? That's the first question. Now, when we look at accurate, can the source be trusted? That's the thing. Can the source be trusted? Is the second question that we need to ask. So you look at, is the source accurate? Now, how do we know if the source is accurate? It is when you need to find out that who wrote the source. So who wrote the source will inform us, is the source accurate or not. If the source, for instance, was written by the USA, and it talks basically about capitalism, then we know the source is useful basically because it informs us. So what we should look for, who wrote the source. The second thing is, when was the source made? So now the date comes in now. So it means now we need to look at the date now. So at the same time, you look at who's the author of the source, you look at the date, and that is, where is that normally found? It's found in the caption, it's found on top of the source. Then why was the source created? So who wrote the source will basically be found where? In the caption. When was the source made? It talks about the date. It will be in the caption. And why was it created? So that all those 3 will be found where? In the caption of the source. Then also, what would be found in the caption of the source? It is basically the motive why the source was created. Is the evidence in the source consistent with evidence from other sources? And that is what we call collaboration. Are there any collaboration? Are they in agreement with other sources that have been dealt with prior to this particular source? Then Let's go to usefulness. Now, please, learners, please remember now, usefulness is asked in two ways. Usefulness is basically ask, explain the usefulness, comment on the usefulness. What are they saying? The source is already, when they say comment, it means the source is already useful. Explain the usefulness. You must now say why, you must convince us why the source is useful. And basically, when you look at how reliable is the source, it is almost answered in the same way as you answer usefulness, basically. Now let's go to usefulness quickly. The usefulness of the source depends on the purpose of the source. What is the source being used for? Is it relevant to my investigation, to the question being asked? Now, these are the questions that we should look at when we answer usefulness of questions, basically. Now, take note, it's comment and explain the usefulness. When we answer usefulness, we look at a caption. The caption might guide us how to find a particular answer. But then we go into the paragraphs, and then we summarize the paragraphs. Maybe there's 2 or 3 paragraphs. We summarize the paragraphs. We take out the main idea. That will tell us basically how the source is useful. So we start by the caption. So when we look at the first question being asked, is it accurate? Where is that found? In the caption. Does it mean what it says? Can it be corroborated with other sources? Is it in line with other sources? Who produced it? So now, when we dealt with reliable, we says who wrote the source. So here it says who produced it and why was it produced, basically. So now we can clearly see, if we understand how to answer reliable questions, it becomes easier to answer usefulness at the same time. So the focus of how to answer usefulness is to assess whether the information in the source can be used for the period under the topic that is under discussion at this point in time. Now let's quickly go to limitations. Remember, when we dealt with biasness, we said if the source is biased, already it is limited at the same time. If it's from one individual, it's limited at the same time. But what we need to understand is the source is also limited if there's no author. Also, it is limited if, take note, if there's no author, the source is limited. If it's from one side, it is limited. If there's no date given, the source is limited at large also. So this kind of question point to the quality of the source. So we need to look at the quality of the source. So when we look at the quality of the source, all the things that I've mentioned now, who wrote the source? Is there a date in the source? Is it from one side? Now that speaks about the quality of the source, if it is limited or not. So learners, please, because a lot of learners are finding it difficult to answer when they say, explain the limitations within this particular source. So it means now you need to look at, is there author who produced the source? You need to look at, is the source that was written, is it biasness? If it's a cartoon, is the cartoon or the visual source biased as such also? You need to look as if there's a date, and that speaks about the quality of the source. So you will be looking at things like bias, how reliable is the source? So exactly what I mentioned, who wrote the source? Is there a date, basically? Why was the source produced? And this will then point you in a direction of whether the source will be useful or not. For example, the source may be limited because it only presents one side, one point of view, and that makes the source limited because it's biased. Or it may be limited because the source is not accurate, there's no date, it doesn't inform us who wrote the source, it doesn't give reasons for the existence of the source. So it is imperative that we understand, if there's no date, if the source is not accurate, it doesn't produce, then the source is not reliable. If the source is not reliable, it means there are limitations to it. So when we look at the word limitations means we can only do so much, but not more than that is requested from us. Now let's quickly go to the paragraph questions. This question is worth basically 8 marks. It is assessed, when we talk about it is assessed, we're talking about how it's being marked. It is assessed using a holistic analytical rubric. The question is phrased so that it is a level 3 question, basically. For example, explain the role, the impact, causes, effects of significance of a particular historical event. The paragraph questions always relates back to the key question. Now let's stop here. The paragraph question always relates back to the key question. When you read your question paper, you start off by the instructions. After the instructions, now you are confronted with question one. When you read question one, next to question one, or it is always on top of question one, there is what we call a key question. It is written in bold. Now, that is the key question. Your key question is basically your paragraph question. So what should you do now here basically? Because if your key question is your paragraph question, it means now you must use information from relevant sources. Because why? The key question informs us we are going to focus on the tension between USA and USSR. So as you are going through the sources, maybe you go through source 1A, underline what's answering, what is creating the pressure. But take note, your first source always creates the basis. So you must now inform us what created this tension first of all. Then you underline what's, and sometimes learners, it is important that we understand that sometimes as you underline, you might underline in source 1A 3 questions. Three answers to the question basically. So it means now you will be finding 3 answers in source 1A. When you go to 1B, you might find 1. Now take note, source 1B is maybe talking to source 1C. When I'm saying talking, 1B might be a visual source, 1C might be a written source, but they are talking to each other. When I say talking to each other, it means now they are sharing similar information pertaining to this particular topic. So it is important, learners, that we understand that in any source-based question, there are 2 sources that speaks to each other. When we say speak to each other, it means they are sharing the same information. And this is why it is pertinent that we understand that there are 4 sources, but 2 of them are speaking to each other. Then how should you answer this question? Normally they would phrase it to you in this fashion, that you should use the relevant sources and your information, and then you should write 8 lines, 80 words basically. Now learners, to write 8 lines, it becomes a difficult task. And this is why most learners are not scoring total marks. Now the total mark here for the paragraph question is basically 8 marks. The reason why they don't score total at times is because the minute they come to line number 8, now they stop. The minute they come to 80 words, now they stop. No, learners, you must write actually 8 lines is basically the minimum. Now take note, 8 lines is the minimum. It means 8 lines is the basis where you move from. It means you can write more than 8 lines. It means you can write more than 80 words. Now, why am I saying this? I'm saying this, learners, so that you can understand that I write small, you write big, or vice versa. So it's imperative that we understand you must go beyond 8 lines, and you must go beyond 80 words basically. Now take note, learners, this is a paragraph question. A paragraph question doesn't mean like on the screen that you can view currently, it's dots, it's bullets. So in a paragraph, no bullets will be allowed. Take note of that, no bullets will be allowed. If your paragraph is in bullet form, you will basically only receive 2 marks, and that is the maximum that you will receive because there's no structure that is being given basically. It means it will be a level 1 mark as such also. So after understanding that it's not in point form or bullet form, but it flows, the sentences flows. If the one sentence stops in the middle, you don't continue on the next line, because and then you're breaking down the whole paragraph. So what do? You go and you continue where the sentence has stopped basically. Now, learners, as I've indicated, let me just re-emphasize now. Read through all the sources. That's the key. You read through all the sources and underline the relevant facts that's answering the question. Then, after you have done source 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, when you get to the paragraph question, now you have underlined what's answering the key question. Now it becomes easy. Now learners, I know that you are not used to it, but you need to start practicing currently now with activities that you do in class. Underline the key question. When you get to the paragraph question, it becomes easy for you to answer. Then you need to transfer all the facts onto as an answer. Now take note, if you copy paste, not allowed. Copy paste means you are quoting exactly as is from the source. Learners, you must paraphrase from the source. If you copy paste, if you quote, it's copy paste, you write it down as is, you will receive 0 marks. Meaning now you will not be allocated any marks, because why? You have copy paste, and you cannot copy paste. You must write it with interpretation. You must evaluate it at the same time. Remember, learners, you must reference your sources. So now you have discovered in source 1A, there are 3 answers. Write down the first one, indicate at the end or in front, indicate source 1A. Then you write down the second point. You write down, after paraphrasing it, you paraphrase it and you put it on as an answer at the end, source 1A. The third one, similar. Now you move over to 1B now. When you are dealing with 1B, now it's imperative that we understand, basically, when you deal with 1B, you follow the same thing. You paraphrase, at the end you indicate where it was found. Now take note, you can also use what we call own knowledge. So when we talk about own knowledge, learners, we are not talking what you know about life. It means now you must have content, you must have studied the work. And that is basically when we talk about own knowledge. It's work that's in the book, it's work that's in the textbook, it's work that was provided to you by the teacher. Now remember, learners, when you reference it, you can indicate own knowledge, but it must be, when you reference, it must be in brackets. You must open in brackets and you must close in brackets at the same time. Then this is how it should be, basically. Let me just show you an example that's on the screen. In source 1A, Kennedy said, you see, so you can put it in front. All you need to do is write down the relevant information, and then after your point, put the relevant brackets. So you can put it in front, or you can put it, but if it's at the back, it must be in brackets. Now take note, learners, do not write more than 3/4 of a page. So what am I saying here? I'm saying to you, 8 lines is the maximum. 80 words is the minimum. 8 lines minimum, 80 words minimum at the same time. But don't write more than 1/4 of the page. Yes, you can write half of the page, but try not to write more than 1/4 of the page particularly. Now, learners, so it is imperative that we understand that the paragraph question is basically 8 marks. And because it's 8 marks, it means you must have answered. And I've seen the pattern, basically. The pattern is when you are dealing with 1A, you underline. When you're dealing with 1B, you underline. If it's a visual source, you just underline the keywords that is being highlighted. But remember now, if it's a visual source, you must now phrase it that it become now a question. So who must phrase the question? You must phrase the question if it is a visual source. So when you comment on the source, already they are informing you what should be in the paragraph answer. So learners, it's important that we understand how these level 1, level 2, level 3 questions work. We need to understand level 1 questions, it's answers that are found where? In the sources. What is not in the sources of level 1 questions are the definitions. When we go to level 2 questions, now take note, when we go to the level 2 questions, it's pertinent that some of the answers will be in the sources, but it must be interpreted. Because when they ask you what is implied, what is implied refers basically how you should actually answer these particular questions as such. Now let's go to question 1, to the structure quickly. Now take note, before we continue, paper 1 has got for source-based question 1, 2, and 3. So we are going to look at question 1, 2, and 3, the structure with regards to the different questions as such. Now let's quickly go to the level 1 questions. The level 1 questions by question 1 starts by 1.1.1. It indicates level 1, then the mark scheme is 1 times 2. Explain the concept. You see, so the concept is not in the source. So when the concept is not in the source, it's imperative that we understand the first answer, that's the first question being asked, is always found in the first 3 lines. Then question 1.1.2, the level is level 1, 2 times 1, identify 2 reasons. Then 1.2.1, level 1, mark scheme 2 times 1, identify 2 names or 2 individuals in the source. Then 1.2.2, level 1, the mark scheme is 1 times 2 according to the source. 1.2.2b, level 1, 1 times 2 according to the source. 1.5.1, level 1, 1 times 2 according to the source. 1.5.3, level 1, and the mark scheme is 1 times 2, and the question will be 2 methods. You must name 2 methods being used in the source. Then we move over. Now we can clearly see that it is 14 marks. Now that's how the level 1 questions will be basically. It will not be actually exactly like it is here, but this will be the order. It will amount up to 14 marks. Then level 2 starts by 1.1.3. Now take note, 1.1, it means source, now the first source. When it says 1.2, it means the second source. When it says 1.3, the third source. When it says 1.4, it is the fourth one basically. Then the marking location for 1.1.3 is 2 times 2. Use the information in the source in your own knowledge. Remember what I said. This was not on the screens earlier. So you use the information in the source in your own knowledge. Then 1.1.4, the marking location is 2 times 2. You must comment on the message conveyed through the source, or you must comment on the source basically. Then 1.2.3, the mark scheme is 2 times 2. Explain. Then 1.3.1, 1 times 2, how do we understand what is transpiring in the source? Then 1.3.2, 2 times 2, using the information in the source and your own knowledge. Then let's go to the last one, 1.5.2. It says comment again. Now take note, learners. 1.1.4, it says comment. Now that means source 1A. Now it says 1.5.2, it means it's a separate source that is basically being asked here. And this is normally 1.5, it's basically the compare question that's being posed here basically. Then let's go to level 3. Level 3 question starts by 1.4. Mark your location, mark scheme, 2 times 2, comparison. 1.2.4, level 3 questions, mark scheme 2 times 1, usefulness of the question. Then 1.6, it's 8 marks and it's a paragraph. So now we can clearly see level 1 will be 14 marks, level 2 will be 20 marks, level 3 will be 16 marks. Take note, level 1, 14, level 2, 20 marks, level 3, 16 marks. And this is how the structure of the of question 1 would be to you also. Now let's go to question 2 structure. We can see basically 2 times 1 times 2.1.1 says 2 times 1, quote 2 pieces from the source. 2.1.2, we can clearly see it's 1 times 2, define the concept. 2.1.5, 1 times 2, why according to the information in the source. Then it's 2.2.1, 1 times 2, what? Then 2.2.2, 4 times 1, name any 4 or list any 4 or identify any 4 basically. Then 2.3.1, 1 times 2, why according to the source. Then let's go to level 2 questions. Level 2 starts by 2.1.3. It's basically the marking location is 2 times 2 and comment. Then we move over to 2.1.4, 2 times 2, explain why you think. Then 2.3, 2 times 2, explain why you think. Then 2.5.1, explain the message in the source. Then 2.5.2, 2 times 2, comment. We can see again comment is asked twice. Level 3 question starts by 2.3.2. Now, when it says 2.3, it means when the second number indicates what type of source we are dealing with also. Like in the first instance, level 1 and 2, we see that there was from source 1A, there was from 1B, 1C at the same time. So level 3 questions, 2 times 3, 2.3.2, it speaks about usefulness. 2.4, it speaks about comparison. 2.6, it speaks about paragraph. So now we can see paragraphs are in all the source-based questions. And learners, how do you answer paragraph questions? Like I indicate, you underline what's speaking to the key question. When we look at the level at questions, the structure of question 3, 3.1.1, mark scheme, 2 times 1. Name any 2. 2.1.2, 2 times 2, what? 2.2.1, 2 times 1, state 2. 2.2.3, 1 times 2, what according to flock? 3.5.1, 1 times 2, explain the term. 1.5.2, quote any 2. 3.5.3, select any 2. Then when we go to basically to level 2 questions, it starts by 3.1.3, 2 times 2, use the information in the source and your own knowledge. 3.1.4, mark your location, mark scheme, 2 times 2, comment. 3.2.2, 2 times 2, use the information in the source and your own knowledge. 3.4.1, mark your location, 2 times 2, explain why you think. 3.4.2, 2 times 2, comment. When we go to level 3 questions, it says 3.3. Now we can clearly see 3.3, and it indicates 2 times 2, comparison. 3.5.4, mark your location, 2 times 2, usefulness. 5.6, it's supposed to be 3.6. Then it says paragraph. We can clearly see paragraphs are in all the 3 questions, and we can clearly see the mark allocation per level, and that will enable us learners to answer these questions properly. Now learners, let us quickly go for a break. When we come back, we will be dealing with the content of the civil rights movement.
I want you to ask yourself these 3 questions. Number 1, what do I want? Do I want to become an A student, or do I want to become an average student? Number 2, I want you to ask yourself, how do you plan on getting there? Are you going to put more extra hours, or are you going to just sleep? Number 3, who will be with you in this journey? Because it is important that we associate ourselves with students who have the same vision as us, who want to become A students, who want to put in the extra work, who want to become better at what they do. Unsuccessful people do not plan, they just let life happen to them. But successful people are planning on how they want their lives to be. And right now, you plan on how you want your results at the end of the year to be like. I want you to ask yourself,
Excellence. Excellence is a habit. Excellence is a quality you have, a quality I have. It's a quality we have when we honor what is true to us. Yes, we are gifted differently. uNkulunkulu akasinganga ngokufana. Excellence is striving for your best. Whenever you have a particular project, test, homework, uzibuze, ask yourself, is this my best? Can I put in more effort? Excellence is striving to be in the top 1% of the area in which you are gifted. And so I challenge you, in every single thing that you do, in every single area that you're gifted in, whether it's sports, it's academic, ucula, whatever that gift is, strive for excellence.
Today's history lesson. My name is Mr. Dixon. This lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Sabono Discovery Center. With the first session, we dealt with the cognitive levels pertaining how you should answer the source-based question. Now we are going to deal with the content which relates to the source base that we are dealing with. And we are dealing with civil rights movement in the USA in the 1950s. And this is basically a source-based section. Now take note, in paper 1, there's question 1, 2, and 3. The 2 weeks ago, we dealt with question 1, which was the origins of the Cold War. Now we are dealing with question 3 in paper 1, basically. Now let's move into, let's quickly go through the overview of topic number 3. The first bullet indicates reasons and origins of the civil rights movement were in the USA. The role, impact, and influence of Martin Luther King Jr., the different forms of protest through civil disobedience, the Montgomery bus boycott, sit-ins, marches, including those to Lincoln Memorial, Birmingham campaign, and the Selma Montgomery marches, school desegregation, short-term and long-term gains as such. Now let's quickly use the timeline to create the foundation in order for us to move from basically. It's pertinent that we understand in 1954, it was the schools was, school segregation was classified as illegal. So what does it mean now? It means now it's got to do with a Linda Brown issue where a girl of about 7, 8 years old, she was denied to be enrolled at a particular school in her community, basically where she found herself. The parents went to the Supreme Court. Take note, the Supreme Court is the highest level of court within the USA as such. Then that is not part and parcel of the civil rights movement. That was a isolated incident, basically. 1955, this is where the civil rights movement actually started. It started with the Rosa Parks incident, the Rosa Parks arrest, which led to the Montgomery bus boycott. Then in 1956, the bus boycott ended. Take note, it was basically 381 days. So it started in 1955 and it ended in 1956. At the same time, Martin Luther King's house was bombed. Then when we moved to 1957, Little Rock 9, that's also a separate incident because 9 African American students were selected to attend the Little Rock High School, basically. So this is why it's called the Little Rock 9, because 9 African American students that were outstanding, they were selected to attend a white-only high school within Little Rock, basically. Then in 1960, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was founded. Take note, and a very important person was part of this leadership, Stokely Carmichael, and Martin Luther King was part of that organization. Then also in 1960, it was the start of the Greensboro sit-in. Take note, the Montgomery bus boycott, the Greensboro sit-in. Then 1961, it was the Freedom Rides. Then also 1963, it was basically the Birmingham campaign. At the same time, it was the Children's Crusade. The Children's Crusade Birmingham campaign, it's basically one event. Because of the Birmingham campaign, it leads to the now to the Children's Crusade. Then in 1963, later on, after the Birmingham campaign, it was what we would call the March to Lincoln Memorial. It means now it was the march in Washington, where they met at a particular junction within Washington, and they marched from that junction to the Lincoln Memorial statue, basically. Then it was at the Lincoln Memorial March where Martin Luther King made his famous speech, "I Have a Dream." Then also 1964, Martin Luther King was awarded a Nobel Prize because of his efforts to create peace, because he believed that whites and African Americans should work together in order to create peace within the United States of America. Then 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated. Then also it was the Selma to Montgomery March, basically. Then also in 1965, it was the Voters' Rights Act, which was granted. Then in 1968, it was the Civil Rights Act that was passed. Take note, the Civil Rights Act was agreed in 1963, but it was only passed in 1968. Then 1968 also, Martin Luther King was assassinated, basically. So this timeline creates a basis where we should work from, basically. What we need to understand also that in 1863, slavery was abolished within the USA. This is what we need to understand. Slavery was abolished. They in the 13 southern states. Now, when we look at the 13 southern states, we're talking about the states that was basically at the bottom, in the south of the USA. The 13 southern states, they introduced what we would call black codes, and these black codes would be called Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow was basically a song mocking the African Americans of their struggle within the USA, basically. Now, the 13 southern states, they basically continued with the black codes, which was nicknamed Jim Crow laws, and these laws were segregation laws, exactly like the laws in South Africa, the apartheid laws that we had. Then these segregation laws would disadvantage African Americans from obtaining job opportunities, traveling and sitting next to each other in the same bus, using the same entrances, basically. So it was clearly a way of segregating African Americans, looking down upon them. So the civil rights movement was basically started in order to ensure that African Americans are treated well. Now, let's move into more background knowledge pertaining to the reasons why the civil rights movement came to the forefront. On the screen, you can clearly see we want a white school. So this is basically clear that this has got to do with the Little Rock Nine. It's basically got to do with the Linda Brown issue, 1954. Now, many African Americans believe that their lives would change after World War I, after World War II. Why? Because they had fought for the country and expected to be treated as equals, basically. Black American activists were frustrated by the federal. Now, in America, federal is government. Federal and state governments' lack of action to implement desegregation. Now, please remember, learners, we are not dealing with, we are not explaining how you should remember your concepts. Now, desegregation, it means basically bringing together. Segregation means separation. So you need to remember your concepts at large also. They were also, the African Americans, they were also angered by the huge resistance of white, like you can see on the poster, of white Americans against the ending of segregation and the ongoing violence against black people, white supreme racist groups, how they would brutally just assault or kill African Americans and nothing would occur pertaining to that incident, particularly in the southern states. It was in this context that the civil rights movement emerged. Now let's continue and let's look at the particular role players that was involved with the civil rights movement. Now, as you can see on the screen, it says the role and influence of Martin Luther King. Now, how did this thing all come about? We need to understand, we spoke about the Rosa Parks incident in 1955. what happened. We need to ascertain what happened with the Rosa Parks incident. The Rosa Parks incident basically was that Rosa Parks had a degree, but she was working as a seamstress because of the inequality in the southern states. Now take note, the north of America, they had no segregation laws. Now we need to ascertain, we need to understand that America is divided into 51 states, and 13 from the 51 had these segregation laws. So the rest, the majority of the Americans, were not in favor of these segregation laws. So what happened to Rosa Parks? She came from work. Now the front rows were basically reserved for white people. But if the front rows were filled up, the African Americans had to stand up and move to the back of the bus. So Rosa Parks was sitting in the African American section in the first row. So the front row of the bus was filled up, and a white male came and stood next to her, and she refused to render a seat. And because she refused to give up a seat, she was arrested because she went against the Jim Crow laws. And through her arrest, the community of Montgomery got together under the leadership of Martin Luther King. Now let's quickly look into who was Martin Luther King. So they got together, and that's how the civil rights movement started. But we will go into detail now. Who was Martin Luther King? So Martin Luther King became the leader of the civil rights movement, and they agreed on what would be a Montgomery bus boycott. So they boycotted the buses for 381 days. And that resulted in the bus owners realizing that they are losing revenue. And because they were losing revenue, the Supreme Court ruled that buses must be desegregated in Montgomery. Now, who was Martin Luther King? Martin Luther King was a 26-year-old when he was appointed as a Baptist minister in Montgomery, Alabama. Now, take note, Montgomery is a city in Alabama. At the beginning of Montgomery bus boycott, King spoke to a large congregation of people at Hall Street Baptist Church in Montgomery. He became the spokesperson for African Americans. He basically became the leader now of the civil rights movement. He challenged racial segregation and injustice. He was a gifted speaker. He believed in using non-violent protest. Now Martin Luther King believed in satyagraha, which was a strategy implemented by Mahatma Gandhi to passively resist. So Martin Luther King did not believe in violence, in retaliating in violence, basically. He believed in peaceful protest, basically. Now you can clearly see what I spoke about. You can clearly see how the African Americans are protesting, not riding in the buses. You can see some are on a bicycle and others are walking to town. And this lasted basically for 381 days. Now, as I've indicated, Rosa Parks was arrested and resulted in 381 days bus boycott, and the Supreme Court ruled that buses, segregation of buses is illegal. During the boycott, Martin Luther King emerged as a powerful speaker, as the leader of the civil rights movement. But in 1957, King and other religious leaders after this, now take note, this occurred 1955. Then in 1957, King and other religious leaders formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which is abbreviated SCLC, and they began to lead the struggle, basically. And this is why they believe in non-violence. The Montgomery bus boycott could be classified as the first victory for the civil rights movement. Now let's move over to the next form of protest. The next form of protest is what we call sit-ins. Students also played a very pivotal role in the civil rights movement. In 1960, a group of students, African American students, you can see them on the picture, the 4 of them, sat down at a whites-only lunch counter in Greensboro. Greensboro it's a town, and the lunch counter was at a shop called Woolworths, and they waited for service the entire day. The waiting staff, as you can see, the waiting staff is behind the counter. It's an African American. They ignored them the entire day. The students sat peacefully the entire day and refused to move. The next day, a larger crowd of students returned and resumed their protest. Now, the sit-ins did not only remain in Greensboro, but the sit-ins began to spread into different parts of the southern part of the USA. And take note, Greensboro is basically in North Carolina in the USA. So it spread into North Carolina, into South Carolina, into different parts of the USA. But it did not only end at the lunch counters, but it also spread into library inns, where they went into libraries, like the Togolo 9. It went into beaches, into theaters. So when it went into beaches, it was a beach sit-in. It was a theater sit-in. So it went into the different public places where African Americans just went in and they began to sit. And later, white people also began to join them. So it was not only African Americans, so it became difficult for them to be actually, for the police to actually fight against them, because whites was also with them. So the sit-ins became a success because why? Lunch counters were desegregated, theaters were desegregated, even beaches that was only allocated for whites, it was desegregated. So it's imperative that we understand the role that the sit-ins played within that. In the sit-ins, Martin Luther King wasn't part and parcel of that. He was not the one that initiated this process. Basically, he started off with the Montgomery bus boycott, but he supported the sit-ins from the backside. Basically, it means he was supporting them, but he was not part and parcel of this whole process. You can see on the screen there's a bus with ladies on, and let me just read one of the placards. Freedom wheels are rolling. End segregation. Then he says the law of the land is our demand. Basically, we can clearly see there's a combination between white and African Americans that is out, that's hanging outside of the bus. Now let us go into how did the freedom rides start. So take note, it was the Montgomery bus boycotts and the freedom rides. Although segregation on buses had been ruled unconstitutional, segregation was still practiced in the southern states. May 1961, a interracial group of 13 students, meaning white and black students, traveled on 2 Greyhound buses from Washington into the South. These protests became known as the Freedom Rides. And as they were traveling into the South, when they came into the state of Alabama, one of the buses was satellite, and this was live on television. And because of the bus that was satellite, it attracted media attention, and that allowed more people to become part of the freedom rides. Now, Robert Kennedy, the general secretary of the USA, indicated, and he said, listen here, interstate buses must be desegregated. Why must it be desegregated? Because remember now, 1963, segregation was abolished within the USA. So it means now that the Supreme Court is the highest court in the USA. And General Secretary indicated that buses must be desegregated. And for that reason, the 13 southern states had their own laws also. But if the Supreme Court ruled against those laws, it meant that the rule must actually change, basically. So that was now the success of the freedom rides. Now let's move over to the Birmingham campaign. Early 1963, King and the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership, organized an economic boycott of white businesses and a series of protest marches in Birmingham. Now, Birmingham, boys and girls, it was the heartland of the Ku Klux Klan. It means it was the headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan, a racist white supreme group that was fighting against African Americans. Alabama, to segregate downtown stores, many were arrested. Because why? Because what happened is that children also began to join this march, and because the main aim was, let's overcrowd the prisons, let's make the Birmingham as a city ungovernable, and by doing that, they might give in. But the Birmingham business leaders decided that the protest campaign was bad for business and agreed to desegregate their lunch counters, restrooms, and drinking fountains. They jailed the jailed protesters. Like you can see, Martin Luther King was arrested also because of his process. And during his time in prison, he wrote actually a book basically also. Then after the Birmingham campaign, it led to the march, which was indicated march to Lincoln Memorial. Like I've indicated earlier, they met at a particular point and they marched to the Lincoln Memorial statue. And you can see there's a picture where Martin Luther King is standing in front of the statue, basically. So in 1963, black unemployment stood at 11%, basically. So it was in the context of inequality that Philip Randolph, a 74-year-old veteran activist, decided to organize a march in Washington. This march became known as the March on Washington for Jobs. That was the main purpose here, and freedom. And it was also to celebrate the abolition of slavery that was 100 years ago. Despite initial fears that it would result in more violence, President Kennedy gave the march his authorization. About 250,000 people of all faiths, about 60 of them white, descended on Washington. So now we can clearly see that whites were in support of change within the USA as such. We can see Martin Luther King standing. This was basically to create equality within the USA. But the whole march scenario changed where King actually introduced his famous speech, "I Have a Dream." After the march, President Kennedy agreed on introducing the Civil Rights Act, meaning banning all segregation laws within the USA as such. Also, it means no state must have any form of segregation laws. But Kennedy was assassinated, and it was signed in 1964 by Lyndon Johnson, that became the president after Kennedy was assassinated. Then we move over to the last protest, basically. The last protest was the Selma Montgomery marches. President Johnson called upon Congress to work with him around the clock to prepare new federal legislation to secure rights for all people to vote. Now take note, although the Civil Rights Act was signed by President Lyndon Johnson, African Americans still had to write a literacy test to vote. At that point in time, the literacy level of African Americans was basically 2%. So it means only 2% of African Americans had voting rights. What transpired in Selma is there was a protest. Jackson was trying to protect his grandparents that was beaten up by the police. They shot him and indicated he was trying to shoot at them. And because of that, Reverend Lewis came and he started the first protest. And we can clearly see when Reverend Lewis started the first protest, they marched up until the Lincoln Memorial March. As you can see on the screen, the first picture, they marched to the Edmund Bridge. And when they marched up to the Edmund Bridge, the police ordered them to turn back. And this was on the 7th of March, 1965. They refused to turn back and they were beaten up. And as you can see, the first picture on the screen of the four photos, you can see how the tear gas is being sprayed, how the demonstrators are beaten up. So on 9 March 1965, 2 days after the first march, Martin Luther King joined them. When they came to the Edmund Bridge, Martin Luther King was ordered by the police to turn back. He looked at the police, looked at the crowd, and he said, "Let's go back." Remember, passive resistance. He was there for passive resistance. So on the 19th of March 1965, the Supreme Court ruled that a march from Selma to Montgomery is legal. On their way, as they were marching on the 21st of March 1965, when they got to Selma, there was more than 20,000 people that joined the march. As you can see, the second photo, it says, "We march with Selma." So now you can look at the amount of people. You can see how the people were joining up. So on 6 August 1965, Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, which eliminated all voting literacy. It means no African American had to write a test anymore. So the civil rights movement achieves its aim of equality before the law because of that now. So let's look at the short-term and the long-term gains quickly. As President Johnson signed Voting Rights Act into law in 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. had mobilized thousands of black and white Americans to participate in civil disobedience between 1955 and 1965. Take note, 1955, 1965. The signing in 1964 of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, those were long-term gains basically. So now we can clearly see that the short-term gains resulted in the long-term gains. Now, boys and girls, I presented to you the content that you should know for this particular question. Now I have designed a question quickly, and this question is a source-based. It's a visual source-based, basically. Let us just read through the source. You can see there, I wrote source 3C. The photograph below depicts young African Americans and whites in a swim-in to protest against segregation in swimming pools at Pullen Park Swimming Pool in Raleigh, North Carolina on 7 August 1962. In the background of the photograph are two groups, African Americans sitting and whites standing separately. So when I look at the picture, I can clearly see it shows me a group of young African Americans, and the arrow is pointing to them. They're sitting in front of the umbrella. Then I see the other arrow pointing a group of young whites. But in the swimming pool, I can clearly see that white and black are swimming together, and we can see that how they are talking and how they are enjoying. Now let's go to the questions quickly. So the first question, I've only got those two questions. The first question, 3.3.1, explain the message that are conveyed in the photograph regarding the swim-in that took place in Raleigh, North Carolina on 7th August 1962. Remember what I said. You read the question thoroughly, and then you go to the mark allocation. So when I look at the mark allocation, it says 2 times 2 equals 4. Now, learners, what type of question is this? Is this a level 1 question, or is it a level 2 question? I just want you to think a little bit. Let me read the question again. It says 3.3.1, explain the message that are conveyed in the photograph. What type of question is this? All right, as I'm giving you time to think, let me move over to the second question. 3.3.2, what conclusion can be drawn from the photograph regarding the two separate groups that are outside the swimming pool in the context of integration? Look at the mark allocation, 1 times 2. It means one answer must be provided, and then 2 marks will be allocated for the one answer. Now let's quickly go to the answers of the first question. The answer, let me read the question again, and then we can go to the answer. The question is, explain the messages that are conveyed in the photograph regarding the swim-in that took place in Raleigh, North Carolina on 7 August 1962. Mark allocation 2 times 2. 2 is in front. It means I must provide 2 answers. How much marks will be allocated? 2. The photograph shows that both African Americans and whites swimming together. That's the first answer, because I can see that African Americans and whites swimming together. It means they want integration. The second answer, it depicts young African Americans, young African and white Americans who were involved in a protest to end segregation in the swimming pools. So it's repeating, it's not repeating, it's just giving a different point of view. The first point of view, black and white swimming together, they want integration. They swimming together because they're involved in a protest to say, let's end the segregation now. It also highlights that the possibility of ending segregation in public facilities. It shows an attempt to integrate the Pullen Park swimming pool. The photograph conveys that certain people were not in favor of desegregation. The two groups, the African Americans that were sitting under the umbrella, the other whites that were standing outside, they are not in favor of desegregation. Now, let's go to the second question being posed. The second question is as follows, 3.3.2. What conclusion can be drawn from the photograph regarding the two separate groups that are outside the swimming pool in the context of integration? The answers are as follows. It says, now look at the level of both questions. Both questions are level 2. We need to understand they are level 2 questions. It means you must interpret, you must analyze, and you need to also, by interpreting, you are analyzing the question at the same time. The two groups are not comfortable uncertainty of using the same pool. So what are they talking about? There are two groups, because remember the question says that why are there two groups? They are talking about the two groups outside of the swimming pool. So that is what we call interpret now. The two groups are anxious, first time experience, because why? All along they have been living a life of segregation. So this is not used to them that black and white are mixing together. Look at the marker location. It says 1 times 2. So from the two answers provided here, you should only provide one answer, and that will give you the 2 marks. Now, learners, these are examples how questions will be posed. It is imperative that you become fluent within English as a language. You need to read more English. You need to read old question papers, and that will enable you to answer source-based questions properly. Learners, if you don't study the content that has been provided, it becomes difficult to interpret level 2 questions. It becomes difficult to interpret level 3 questions as such also. Now, learners, we have dealt in the first session with the cognitive levels, level 1, level 2, level 3. By now, you are supposed to know exactly that this is a level 1 question, level 2 question. Every time when we are broadcasting, we will be dealing with what is level 1, what is level 2, what is level 3, when we are dealing with a source base. When we are dealing with essay questions, we will be dealing with how you should answer an essay question. It means before the topic, before the content is being brought to you, you must know exactly, you must have the skill to answer a particular question. And today we have used a visual source, and this visual source has been entrusted to us how we should answer this particular question. Learners, thank you for watching this lesson this afternoon, and see you next time. Bye.